Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's the CD guy, Johnny Z here. Thank you so much for tuning back into the channel, and today I'm going to be recognizing 15 legendary rock and metal acts who I feel absolutely deserve to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. This list is really in no particular order, with the exception of my number 1. So that being said, let's get started here with my number 15. I'm going to go with Thin Lizzy, legendary hard rock band who really walked that line between hard rock, metal, blues rock as well. They were folk rock at the beginning of their career, and a band who were influenced by genres such as, rock and blues as well, soul, early psychedelic rock too. So that's really interesting to me. And when it came to their sound musically, they were so unique and so original as well, with fantastic instrumentals in their catalog, right? Some of my favorite Thin Lizzy tracks are instrumentals. They have great vocal harmonies, awesome melodies as well. Really original stuff in the Thin Lizzy sound that makes them so unique, in my opinion, and a band who are criminally underrated and overlooked as well are Thin Lizzy, a band that really don't get half the respect I feel they deserve, and would definitely be a great fit in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but unfortunately have been snubbed up to this point, and I definitely feel they should be inducted into the Rock Hall of Fame, so they come in at number 15 here on this countdown. Next up, how about Motley Crue? I will say at the top here, I'm not the biggest Motley Crue fan of all time, but you have to acknowledge the impact that they had in the 80s on the hair metal scene, really helping to greenlight that hair metal movement of the 80s, pushing through into the mainstream and allowing so many other great bands like Wasp and, Cinderella, Rat to really get their foot in the door. And Motley Crue, financially, have sold over 100 million albums worldwide. Definitely one of those memorable bands from the 80s, for better or for worse, in the rock and metal scene. And like I said, they really helped greenlight the hair metal movement in the LA Strip, really giving a lot of those bands the opportunity because they were able to break through into the mainstream with that that hair metal sound and that hair metal look, right? And I'm not the biggest Motley Crue guy, but if I had to break down the discography, I'd say that my favorite albums are probably some of their earlier stuff, which is just great and timeless tracks on those albums, right? And Motley Crue in general are definitely a band who deserve that recognition for the impact they had on the hair metal movement in the mid to late 80s, in my opinion. So I think they definitely deserve a spot in the Hall. Following that up at number 13, I'm going to go with Jethro Tull. And, Tull are definitely one of the most eccentric prog rock bands of all time. Following the release of Aqualung, they became synonymous with being pioneers of that flute-driven prog rock sound, which is so unique, and I love the way they were able to incorporate the flute into that prog rock sound that created this complex style of playing that is so unique and exclusive to Jethro Tull, which is really cool. Definitely one of the most legendary prog rock bands of all time, and, when it comes to the way that they influence a number of great bands, they definitely became influences for a number of legendary groups who are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, such as Metallica and Pearl Jam, just to name a couple. So I think Tull definitely deserve a spot in the Hall of Fame for the way that they really pioneered that flute-driven prog rock sound that was so unique and groundbreaking at the time, as well as influencing a number of legendary rock bands who are in the Hall currently. When it comes to groups that pioneered genres like hard rock, heavy metal, and prog rock, they're a few more impactful and influential than Uriah Heep, my number 12 here on the list. Like I said, they influenced so many great genres of rock and metal over the years, and, even though they've dealt with a number of lineup changes throughout their history, they still remain one of the most consistent bands, in my opinion, and definitely a group that is super underappreciated and deserves a spot in the Hall of Fame. Like I said, even though their lineup has changed a lot, their playing remains consistent, and their excellent musicianship is what defines Uriah Heep, in my opinion. Super deserving of a spot in the Hall of Fame, in my opinion, and like I said, very, very impactful as a band. One of the best from the 70s, in my opinion, is Uriah Heep. My number 12 here on the list, a group who definitely deserves some recognition in the Hall of Fame. Moving on now into the heavy metal genre with my number 11, I'm going to go with Pantera, and you can see the band on the back here. Really their catalog speaks for itself. In the 90s, they were one of the few bands who were really waving the flag for heavy metal when metal was being eclipsed by alternative and grunge throughout the 90s, but Pantera remained consistent in their sound, and it seemed like their album got heavier and heavier, with Dimebag Darrell on guitar, one of the best guitarists in heavy metal, and Phil Anselmo on vocals, one of those powerful frontmen in heavy metal as well. They dominated the metal scene in the 90s, and when they started out in the 80s, they were doing the glam metal, hair metal thing, and that really didn't work out for them, but in 1990, they changed up their sound and released Cowboys from Hell, which is definitely one of the most revolutionary albums in metal, in a sense that it pioneered the groove metal genre and established Pantera as one of the most powerful metal bands in the world, and really from there, it was off to the races. Everything through Cowboys from Hell to Reinventing the Steel is legendary, in my opinion. In that 10-year stretch, I don't think they have a bad album, and they definitely were one of the defining bands of the 90s, and like I said, really one of the few bands who were waving the flag for heavy metal throughout that decade. Just great stuff from the Pantera catalog, including this album here, Vulgar Display of Power. Like I said, the band is on the back, and just a legendary group, definitely deserving of some recognition, in my opinion, for being a pioneer of the groove metal genre and carrying metal throughout the 90s, in my opinion. So, coming in at number 11 here on the list, I gotta go with Pantera. Moving on to the top 10 now, I'm gonna go with King Crimson, and honestly, it baffles me as to why King Crimson are not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame already. You know, they were one of the bands who really invented progressive rock with their debut album, In the Court of the Crimson King. That was really the album that greenlit the progressive rock movement of the late 60s through the 70s really into effect, was their debut album, and as a band, the technical elements of their playing are fantastic. The musicianship is off the charts, and as a group in general, they're definitely one of the most influential and impactful in the prog rock genre, so I definitely feel they should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and like I said before, it honestly shocks me that they're not in the Hall of Fame already. Up until now, Metallica are the only members of the Big Four of thrash metal to be included in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but I feel that Slayer should also be in the Hall, my number 9 here on the list, and, you know, Slayer are total thrash metal royalty. This album here, Rain and Blood, is a complete thrash metal essential. Slayer are definitely deserving of the spot in the Big Four of thrash for the way that they pioneered the thrash metal genre and brought unmatched aggression to the genre in the late 80s into the 90s, right? Slayer, definitely one of the defining thrash metal bands, and really in general, one of the defining metal bands of all time as well. Super consistent band who were always one of the heaviest thrash metal bands of all time, who were consistent up until their retirement. Just a great, great band. Like I said, thrash metal royalty, and super deserving of being in the Hall alongside the Big Four brethren in Metallica are Slayer, my number 9 here on the list. Coming in at number 8 here, I'm going to go with Blue Oyster Cult, who are definitely one of the most enigmatic rock bands of all time, and although they're probably mostly remembered today for the few songs that are played on classic rock radio, their excellent musicianship and consistent catalog exists far beyond tracks like Burnin' For You and Don't Fear the Reaper. You know, their uniqueness really characterized them with their mythological and extraterrestrial lyricism, as well as captivating live performances and an influential style that would pioneer future genres such as speed and stoner metal. You know, for these reasons, I feel they definitely deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. Like I said before, super enigmatic, unique, and influential are Blue Oyster Cult, my number 8 here on the list. For number 7, I'm going to go with Ronnie James Dio. You know, I don't even know what to say. Ronnie James Dio was a total legend, somebody who was one of the best vocalists in heavy metal history, as well as being an excellent frontman, and whether it be his work in Rainbow, Black Sabbath, or his solo stuff, Ronnie James Dio, everything he touched turned to gold. The guy had the Midas touch, one of the best of all time, and somebody who everybody in rock and metal looked up to was the late, great Ronnie James Dio. He definitely deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. I'm honestly a little disappointed that he's been overlooked in the Hall for so long, but somebody who absolutely deserves his spot in the Hall, in my opinion, is Ronnie James Dio, one of the best to ever do it, and like I said, really should be in the Hall of Fame by now, but for some reason is not. Another group that I can't believe is not in the Hall of Fame by now are the Scorpions. I just saw the Scorpions live last night. It was an incredible show. They still got it. You know, I think Rudy Schenker is probably one of the best live guitarists I've ever seen in concert. Just incredible stuff there, and I had a great time at the concert last night. And that really reminded me of how great they are and why they really should be in the Hall of Fame. And like I said, I'm shocked that they're not in the Hall of Fame yet, but they're definitely one of the best in heavy metal with incredible albums throughout their catalog, such as Love Drive, Love at First Sting, Blackout as well. Just great, great stuff in their catalog, and they really do deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. Klaus Meine in his prime was one of the best metal vocalists of all time. Like I said, Rudy Schenker, incredible live guitarist, and it's just an incredible show that I saw last night, and it really reminded me of how great the Scorpions were and why they deserve to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Ozzy Osbourne is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as the frontman for Black Sabbath, but it's really puzzling to me as to why Ozzy isn't in the Hall of Fame as a solo performer as well, and as legendary as that stuff with Sabbath is, Ozzy has also proven to be one of the most consistent and successful solo artists in metal with great albums, whether it be Bark of the Moon or Blizzard of Oz, this album here, No More Tears, you know, Diary of a Madman. Ozzy's solo output is incredible, and he's always surrounded himself with a great band to boot. Ozzy Osbourne, definitely one of the best and most recognizable frontmen in heavy metal, whether it be with Black Sabbath or on his own. So I think his solo career definitely deserves some praise in the Hall of Fame for being so successful. And, you know, nobody expected Ozzy to be as successful as he was after he left Sabbath, but he proved everybody wrong, and his solo career is still going strong today. I believe Ozzy has an album in the works that should be out sooner rather than later, which has me very excited. But Ozzy Osbourne is a total legend as a solo artist as well, and definitely deserves to be in the Hall on its own. Moving on now to number 4 here on the list, I'm going to go with Motorhead. And earlier I was talking about consistency in a lot of these bands' catalogs, and perhaps there was no band more consistent in their catalog than Motorhead because all their albums sounded the same, and I wouldn't have it any other way because the Motorhead sound was so unique and, you know, unique to them, right? And that was largely due to the fact that nobody sounded quite like Lemmy on lead vocals, and he would also tune his bass like a guitar, which created that unique Motorhead sound. And also, I was talking about how a lot of these bands were so influential, and perhaps there was no band more influential than Motorhead in heavy metal because it seems like over the years, they've influenced everybody in rock and metal one way or another, which is really cool. And even though Lemmy probably could care less about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, it would still be really cool to see them get the recognition they deserve in the Rock Hall. So coming in at number 4 here on the list, I'm going to go with Motorhead. How about some grunge on this list with Alice in Chains coming in at number 3? They're one of my favorite bands of all time, and a group that really proved to be one of the best to come out of that Seattle music scene in the 90s. Personally, they're my favorite of the big four of grunge, and, when it comes to their catalog, they've released a number of fantastic albums, such as Facelift, their debut, and this EP here, Jar of Flies, which is great, their breakthrough album, Dirt, and even one of their more recent albums, Black Year's Way to Blue, is fantastic as well. Their 90s output with Layton Staley is nothing short of legendary, but I even enjoyed their more recent stuff with Will Duvall on vocals, which sounds great too, and I think their catalog is almost perfect. I don't think they have a bad album in their catalog, and they definitely deserve to be in the Hall of Fame alongside Big Four members of grunge, Nirvana, and Pearl Jam. I think they'd be a great fit in the Hall, and I'm not sure why they're not in already. Speaking of grunge, I'm shocked that Soundgarden aren't in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame yet either. My number 2 here on the list are Soundgarden, led by Chris Cornell, who in my opinion is one of the best vocalists in hard rock history. Soundgarden combined influences of Black Sabbath with those doomy riffs with Chris Cornell's bombastic vocals to create one of the best sounds of the 90s. And, Soundgarden, similarly to Alice in Chains, definitely fit in the Hall of Fame alongside the other big four of grunge in Nirvana and Pearl Jam to round out the big four. And like I said, I'm shocked that Soundgarden aren't in the Hall of Fame already. And also, I'm shocked that Chris Cornell isn't in the Hall of Fame, at least as a solo performer, because in general, I think Chris Cornell definitely deserves a spot in the Hall of Fame. So whether it be with Soundgarden or on his own, Chris Cornell definitely should be in there. So coming in at number 2, I'm going to go with Soundgarden. Like I said at the beginning of the video here, this ranking was really in no particular order, with the exception of my number 1 on the list, which I feel the most strongly about. And coming in at number 1 here on the list, I'm going to go with the most egregious snub the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame has had up to this point. That's Iron Maiden. My favorite band of all time, and definitely one of the best heavy metal groups to ever exist, in my opinion, is Iron Maiden. You can see the group on the back here. Bruce Dickinson, Steve Harris on the bass. You got Adrian Smith, Dave Murray, Nico McBrain on the drums, and Yannick Years. The band is incredible. Some of the best musicians in metal history, in my opinion, are Iron Maiden. And looking at their catalog, they have classic albums throughout, such as Number of the Beast and Power Slave, Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, the reunion album, Brave New World, 2015's The Book of Souls, and even their most recent album, Senjutsu, is amazing. The band is moving in a more progressive direction now, and they're still going strong. Still an incredible live group as well, are Iron Maiden. I've seen them live many times. They're always great. My favorite band of all time, like I said, is Iron Maiden, and they definitely should be in the Hall of Fame. The fact that they're not is enraging at this point, and I truly believe that there's a spot in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for Iron Maiden, even though the band has said that they could care less whether they get in or not. I do believe that Maiden should be in the Hall of Fame for their impact on the heavy metal genre as a whole. So coming in at number 1 here, I'm going to go with Iron Maiden. If Dolly Parton and Eminem can get into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, then I definitely believe that these 15 legendary groups could get into the Hall of Fame as well. So if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel down below, turn on the bell for notifications to be notified of a new upload, and let me know down in the comments below what rock and metal groups do you wish were in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I'd be very interested in hearing your input, your comments here, who you think should be in the Hall, so let me know all that good stuff down in the comments. And until next time, it's the CD guy, Johnny Z, signing off. Take care, everybody.